I've done it. I've solved FNAF, and the clue that brings it all together is this.
Don't you hate getting killed by obscure secondary characters?
Hello, Internet! Welcome to Game Theory, where today I'm just gonna... straight to the point. This episode was supposed to be our final timeline, but you know what? It's not quite there yet. I think we're gonna have it ready for next week. There's just a few wrinkles that we need to iron out about Elizabeth's death specifically, but otherwise, I feel really good about everything we've pieced together so far. That said, I wanted to put this episode up first regardless, because it dives into a section of the timeline that's likely going to be controversial, which is also a bad thing, because it's the beginning of the timeline. Nothing like starting off on the wrong foot, you know? So in order to head that one off in the past, let's just start talking about it now, shall we?
It's not a good idea. Seems weirdly packaged.
Basically, that we've broken down everything into three key sections: the foundation of Freddy's, the Afton era, and post-Purple God. In that episode, we dug hard into the last chunk, trying to figure out the recent history with things like FNAF VR and Security Breach. But even trickier is the first chunk, the foundation of Freddy's. You see, at this point, we all have a general basic knowledge of the games, right? Kids die, animatronics get incest, all that good stuff. But here, that foundational stuff right at the beginning, that's the murkiest, because honestly, there's not a lot that's immediately clear to me. Sure, there's a couple of points censored novels, but otherwise, it seems to be about it. How did William Afton and Henry Emily start working together? Were they rivals? Why did Afton start killing in the first place? Was Fredbear's Family Diner truly the first location? These are questions that seem important for us to answer, and honestly, if you're looking at where the timeline of Five Nights at Freddy's really begins, it's with those sorts of questions. The only problem is that the answers just might not exist anywhere in the canon yet. Or so I initially thought. Brings us to today's episode. I suspect that there may be a way to answer some, if not all, of those questions. Feel like more. In the process, I think it'll help us get a better understanding of William Afton's motive, while also outlining a rough sequence of events that'll ultimately help place locations and other things when I tackle the full timeline of the series next week. And all of it hinges on one thing: a set of obscure secondary characters. War of Elephant, and Bear, Big Fat, and Frog. Yeah, I know, Mr. Ripple, I agree. This level that is 4 times higher, but in this case, it actually did read into you enough. You see, when the mediocres were first introduced to Pizzeria Simulator, we, as the community, largely dismissed them. And why wouldn't we? This is a game where you're pulling animatronics out of a dumpster. Trash and the gang are literally made of garbage. Why would we think that some random barnyard-themed characters would be worth our attention when there was already so much established lore inside of the thing? We beat the game, we solved the lore, we moved on. Then Ultimate Custom Night released. There they were again. It was strange to see them fill so many slots, but I don't know, there was also trash in the gang.
What?
Music Man! Other random pulls from the character deep cuts, so it was just Scott trying to fill out the roster. Then
You know what? This is fine.
Well, they were mostly treated as a joke. If you dive to them, every once in a while they give voice to the most important character and mystery from the game. The one you shouldn't have killed, Cassie.
You've only just begun. I will never let you leave. I will never let you rest.
It was a huge revelation, and the lines that they spoke ultimately helped us to determine that Custom Night was William Afton's endless torment at the hands of the spirits inside the Golden Freddy suit. But again, none of us ever stopped to consider why them? Why these characters? Why were they the ones that Cassidy was choosing to speak through? Why were they here? Well, after doing a lot of research for the grand overall timeline, I would say no. The mediocre melodies were Henry's creation from a time before he and William started working together. When the two men merged their ideas together to form one company, the mediocres became temporary characters at Fredbear's Family Diner before eventually being retired largest stuff. Oh yeah! That is a lot of big swings that I'm making with some massive assumptions. So let's just rewind and take it one step at a time, shall we? First, how do we know that the mediocre melodies belong to Henry? Well, let's just look at their design. It's very simple. They're similar to the Endo 01 designs from the FNAF 1 animatronics, and even more rudimentary with less flexible joints and less complex wiring. But the important very basic hinge towards the back of the head, or two metal bars that slide up and down along the side. And you see, that right there is what tells us they belong to Henry. Well, there are plenty of animatronics that fall into a nebulous zone of design, and there are pieces of tech that we can definitely trace back to their original creator. The Funtime animatronics, for instance, definitely came from athletes. Not only were they designed with the intent of boring and capturing children, something that just doesn't jive with Henry, but the blueprints outright have active robotics written in the corner. Not much you can do to deny that one. Sound Illusion Discs, another active creation, considering the backs of them are stamped with his company name as we see in the graphic novel. The one I'm most interested in today is Lefty, an animatronic designed by Henry used to capture his daughter the puppet during FNAF 6. That was clearly not an Afton project. This was purely Henry's doing in secret. So, knowing that, did you notice the two straight metal rods in the schematics with the jaw fully detached from the top of the head? It's an exact match for the design of Happy Frog. It's a Henry signature. What does that matter? Well, the design of the mediocres also perfectly match up to the first generation of Freddy, Foxy, Barney, and Chica. We know that the Wizards were the early form of our 4-4 animatronics. These were the ones that had children stuffed inside of them and got possessed. They upwent tell us this fact. They use the exact same techniques as the mediocre melodies. They have a full separation between the tops of their heads and their jaws. Wizard, Freddy, and Foxy have the pitch in the back and the big patch. Wizard Chica follows the Happy Frog Lefty with arms and jaw coincidence, like in Chica and other games. Chica can have one fun fantastic design. Funtime Chica, Toy Chica, no see this sort of separated and design for animatronics is the Six once that, again, we know were built by each one animatronic design seems to lead us to my line of events. The mediocres and withers were built by Henry early in my line of games. Eventually, athletes started to think until Henry looked back and designed the robot that were used in his Videotron. But again, I ask, why does any of this matter? Is this just a minor detail? Are you looking for connections where they don't really matter? No. Knowing that the Wizards and the mediocre share design seems like it might help explain another part of the lore, Happiest Day. In FNAF 3's Happiest Day minigame, you walk past children wearing masks that coloring and rough shapes.
Yo, fairy, damn it.
Okay, not all of them, actually. But here's the thing, I'm not the one pointing that detail out. This is actually coming from Scott Buffer. In the Five Nights at Freddy's Ultimate Guide, the character each mediocre melody pulls this out as something worth noting. Quote, it's unconfirmed, but a child in the FNAF 3 Happiest Day minigame appears to be wearing a
Oh, that's super helpful.
Historical mask. A single entry mentions this specific detail. Seems like an odd fan theory to call so much attention to. And remember, Happiest Day is an exact representation of the or pizzeria. We enter the stage where a prime child fit, we pass through the tables, there's a gap, and then the final birthday cake for the cake that's gonna set prime child's soul free. It seems to suggest that at some point the mediocre right alongside Fred, Foxy, Bonnie, and Chica. But what does all that mean? Oh, it's easier than you might think. In the story of the Puppet Carver, we reach out to Pizza Playground, a restaurant that seems to predate or be a competitor to Freddy. And in it, we see that the franchise uses very rudimentary animatronics that break down lines. There's a banjo, an off-brand bear named Baron Von Bear, and an unknown bird animatronic. It's the mediocre melodies guys, Pig Patch, Ned Bear, and hold on, there's no bird in mediocre melodies. Unless, of course, we're talking about Chica. What this story seems to heavily suggest is that Chica started at a different pizza franchise and eventually crossed over into Freddy's, becoming popular enough to eventually join the core 4. Also working at that pizza playground is a talented creator named Court. Someone who just had the ability to make amazing content and run. Court is the book stand-in for Henry. Henry may not be the most advanced creator out there, but whatever he creates, sparkling light. It's how he makes endoskeletons out of nothing but wood. No power, no nothing, just wood and childlike imagination. This, I think, starts to give us an important piece of puzzle. Afton was the business guy. A tech bro, smart, who could build machines able to mimic voices and transform and walk with giant claws out of their stomachs for no apparent reason. But it was Henry who had the pure love of his craft, that intangible thing that couldn't be replicated. And it drove Afton crazy. In the popularized novel, we read about Afton's old journals, that they were, quote, full of raving paranoia. Passages about Henry that ranged from wild jealousy to clear worship, which now gets us towards motive. See, one thing that I kept getting stuck on in the building of a timeline was the question of why. Why does Afton kill? And out of everyone, why does he kill Henry's daughter, Charlie, specifically? She is one of, if not the first victim of the entire series. So why does Afton do it? Just because people just drunk from the bar at Junior's? No, I think Afton both loved and hated his business partner. He admired him for his magic, but also despised him for his success. This contradiction starts to point us to Afton's motive for murder. It also finally helps give us a framework for the early parts of their story. Loyal theorists, let me now point us to the most obvious place that we should have been looking for lore this entire time: the history of the Chuck E. Cheese franchise. Because in a game all about animatronic pizza restaurants, why would we not look to see what creative inspiration Scott might have gotten from the real-life franchise that started it all? I am so dumb. It took me researching an episode over on Food Theory to finally realize that I should have at least considered this at some point during the last 7 years of solving math. Major and death moment. Anyway, I did exactly that, and what I learned was enlightening, to say the least. You see, what we now know of as Chuck E. Cheese actually started as the product of a feud between two rival animatronic pizza restaurants, Pizza Time Theater and Showbiz Pizza Place. Pizza Time was founded by a smart businessman who wanted to recreate Disneyland's Country Fair Jamboree. In the end, their onstage show wound up soulless and had no solid theme. Showbiz Pizza, meanwhile, had a creator who built better robotic attractions that were life. They also had a solid theme where everyone had southern accents and a lot of charm. I mean, just watch the clips and the differences of immediately.
Like, happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, you got it?
You see, we're all up here on the stage, and we can all turn, go around a big circle, together, see, like this, our feet aren't screwed to the floor, holding it down, we can move, we got more moves than a can of worm. And then that old 1-2 Billy Bob can come up there and stick his old ugly mug in your face.
To me, the battle between these two real-life pizza places, these two men, sounds a lot like the battle between William and Finn, a smart businessman who wanted to rip off Disney Bear Show versus a talented artist that was building animatronics with actual life and good southern accents.
I was just waiting for you to drop your guard.
Even small details of the real-life story map nicely onto the game, like the fact that these pizza places had small cabaret stages off to the side with extra acts to get added later. Just like how Foxy stands alone in Pirate Cove. A separate act that we see was the last one added to the core group. In real life, Pizza Time Theater, the one I best associate with William Afton, went heavily into debt, was forced to merge with Showbiz. That meant that, at least for a while, all the animatronics existed under one roof. But because the characters were stronger for branding, specifically Chuck E. Cheese, that's the ones that they ultimately moved forward. I suspect that something similar happened in the games. William's bear-themed restaurant went heavily in debt. He gets saved by his rival Henry to merge their restaurants together to create Fazbear Entertainment. Chica, a mediocre melody, officially joins Fred Bear's cast of friends. The rest are slowly phased out of obscurity, and William, angry and bitter, never truly lives down the humiliation of his failure, prompting him to lash out in a drunken rage against Charlie one night when I'm in the pizzeria. This feels right. Set up William as more than just an evil purple guy. This flow of events actually gives him a reason to want to kill, a motive. It also aligns with a lot of the interviews that Steel Wool Studios has been doing recently. J-Top, creative director at Steel Wool, recently acknowledged how important it is for your horror villain to be an actual, fully fleshed out, tragic character.
Try not to set out to make a cool looking villain. You know, go make a monster that have a reason for it. Look at like anthology horror. Here's somebody doing something really bad. Murder something happens that ironically that then comes back to bite them. A creature is created, a situation is created, and then they're judged. Every big horror icon, it essentially that structure. Why is Freddy Krueger popular? Well, it's a revenge story, isn't it? It's Voorhees, it's a revenge story. These aren't just like supernatural forces that come out of nowhere to hurt people. They were results of
William Afton, if I'm right, follows this exact pattern. His jealousy over Henry's skill causes him to lash out, which in turn dominoes in building the very robots that'll eventually take Elizabeth and his crying child son away from him. The other thing that this mediocre melody kind of issue may help explain is Cassidy's death. In the Fazbear Frights books, there's Andrew, who's basically the book stand-in for Cassidy. I know we're always supposed to take things in the books with a grain of salt, but Andrew here is an angry spirit that keeps William's soul tethered to a hellish purgatory so it can be punished again and again and again. He's also known to have had his body stuffed inside of Golden Freddy, so really the connections between the two aren't subtle. But Andrew has two unusual details about him. First, he wears an alligator mask. Second, and even more strangely, it's repeatedly made clear that his soul is attached not to an animatronic or an endoskeleton or anything like that, but to a battery pack, of all things. Now that is unusual. He's stuffed with the Golden Freddy, but his soul is in a battery. Where in this franchise do we see animatronics using battery packs, let alone off-branded animals using battery packs? Oh, it's the mediocre element. Could it possibly have been around during the missing children's incident? Yes, given what we already talked about with the Generation 1 Freddy, Foxy,
Give me the
Scum
evidence.
action designs and mediocre melodies, it's certainly possible. We also see that the Golden Freddy suit has the same Henry style of design in both the Fazbear Frights illustrations as well as FNAF 4's minigames. We see that Golden Freddy has the separated jaw controlled by two great arms, just like Freddy and just like Happy Frog. And last but certainly not least, we come all the way back around to the point that I started this whole episode with. Cassidy speaks through them, of all characters. Not through Golden Freddy, not through Fredbear, through the mediocre Melbeans, animatronics with a battery. It was an interesting series of connections. So anyway, those were some stray observations that I've been kicking around about the mediocres. What do you think? Do they have greater lore to the story than we initially thought, or are they just meant to be a joke? Am I just falling victim to everything that Mr. Hippo warned me against? Let me know down in the comments below now, because this is your last chance for them to come back to the final FNAF timeline for 2022. Our interpretation of all the events in the series up to now. That episode will be coming in the next week or two. I swear, I am not putting it off anymore. We are going to plow through this thing to the very end. We gotta finish it. Gotta finish it, man. Gotta finish it. Let's do it. So make sure you subscribe to know when that one is uploaded. And in the meantime, remember, stay hydrated. I appreciate that today's theory might be a lot to swallow. Fortunately, you can wash it down with help from today's sponsor, Era. In the FNAF world, smell is usually a bad thing. It's the kind of thing that
Hey, you guys are gonna stick your way up this log and then just put there. Okay. Moving on, though. If you poke around in the area with the slope, you will no doubt get a visit from the iridescent beetle. I mentioned this thing earlier. It's the one that makes your Pikmin stop what they're doing and rush it. It's one of the few things in the game that can make Pikmin break rank even when they're in your party and you're not doing anything in particular. They attack it like it's driving them crazy. It's very hard to pull them off. And if you're trying to get somewhere, it can be
Alright, let's
really
continue.
disruptive. It
The main
says
part
a
for
lot
Nango
about
to
the
Kakariko.
game's delightful unpredictability. You never know what kind of weird creature is going to pop up and mess up your plans. Pikmin can have a mind of their own. You can do your best to control them, but sometimes they just gotta do what they gotta do. Getting a visit from the Flint Beetle is so
Fire is
and
way too
disruptive
important.
that I kinda wish there were more of them in the game, honestly. I think it would have been cool if the Flint Beetle at least showed
Need a
up
bit
on
more
the
of them.
first day to show off the uncontrollable aspect of the Pikmin's personality sooner, but I guess I understand that the devs wanted to keep things simple and limit how many Pikmin you can get on the first day, because there's another thing these creatures can potentially teach you. The Pikmin's attacks do nothing to the iridescent Flint Beetle. It doesn't matter how many reds you've got pounding on the thing, it won't even flinch. If you think to throw your Pikmin, however, and if you can time your throw correctly when it isn't skittering around, you'll find that you can't hurt it, but you can flip it over. This will make nectar and pellets pop out, depending on how many times you do it before it goes away. This is a lesson that sometimes enemies will take very particular strategies to attack, and also that curiosity and experimentation are often rewarded. It's very easy to watch your Pikmin trying to attack it and go, I guess they can't hurt that one, then give up trying. But come at the problem from a different angle, and you find that even if you can't kill a thing, you can still get some resources from it. As with pellet posies, that's an awful lot of lessons to learn from one very simple enemy. And that's why I think it's a particularly good one, despite being super duper annoying. Once the beetle has burrowed away and you've gathered your Pikmin again, the most interesting part of the level is that big open area in front of the stone wall. Starting on day 8, one of 2 boss creatures will spawn.
I really just prefer the 5 speed.
On.
Just with the 5 speed, you don't need to spur as much because it's already so fast. Just running at its full speed at its canter.
Because I always make it back to the impact site well before day 8. I first saw them in the creature reel that plays at the end of the
So I don't need to interact with the game as much.
After a while, I
Just let the horse do its thing and they'll arrive at my destination eventually. I can just relax in the meantime.
Supposed to replicate the encounters. I get it now, though, so I was able to hunt them down on purpose and fight them again for review purposes. And it's just so strange that the developers would put them only right here and make them so easy to miss. I mean, these are bosses. Don't they take a lot of time to design? Don't the devs want us to fight them? It's possible they were experimenting with making the game feel a little more dynamic and unpredictable, potentially different through multiple playthroughs. I can certainly
How do I already have 14?
appreciate such an idea, though it looks like they didn't have the best opportunity to explore it here. Or hey, maybe they just had 2 extra bosses they designed and didn't know where to put them, so they stuck them both in the impact site. Who knows? Let's talk about these 2 weirdos, though. The Mamuda is a very strange enemy. It pounds your Pikmin using its long arms, but instead of squashing them, it merely replants them. As far as I know, beyond dealing damage to Olimar, it's entirely non-lethal. It can prove to be something of a nuisance if it plants most of your Pikmin and you have a hard time replugging them fast enough. But overall, it's not too tough to beat. More than anything, I would say it's an interesting enemy narratively. The thing just stands there looking at you until attacked, which, of course, makes you feel bad about killing it. Moral implications of slaughtering non-aggressive alien creatures a little later. It's suggested in this game and the sequel that the Mamuda has some sort of unknown relationship with the Pikmin. Maybe it just wants to have a pretty flower garden. But some people have pointed out that the markings on its arms are a little reminiscent of those on an onion. So is it possible that there's something much deeper going on? Well, that's the magic of Pikmin. We'll probably never know until the RPGs come up with it. The Mamuda shows up in Pikmin 2, but so I'm less familiar with it than basically any enemy in any mainline Pikmin game. It's actually pretty disappointing that it doesn't have a more prominent place in the game, because it's the one boss that seems to have been designed specifically for blue Pikmin. I mentioned how blue Pikmin aren't used in a ton of interesting ways beyond simply fighting enemies and collecting parts while in water, but the Gulix actually provides a much more interesting opportunity to use them. The creature itself is made of water, but it's also something of a solid mass that moves around on dry ground. It's got these 2 nuclei and you have to attack a little bit, but naturally only blues will be able to get through without drowning. Another disappointment, however, is how laughably easy the thing is. If you throw a Pikmin into the big nucleus, it flies back and smacks the little one like and does a bunch of damage. And it's not even like it's hard to do. It constantly keeps the big one facing you as though it's protecting the little one in back. But that just opens it up to being billiarded. It's kind of like they had 2 concepts for the thing. The idea of smacking the nuclei together and the idea of having to get around the small one. And they decided to include both, even though the ideas kind of interfere with each other mechanically. Kind of weird. It's a very cool creature, so it's sad that the fight potentially lasts only a few moments and takes practically no effort. I guess I can give it a little credit in the difficulty department because it pursues Olimar very persistently, forcing you to keep moving, though that just makes the fight more awkward than difficult. I wonder if this is all why it was relegated to this one obscure spot in the game. Maybe they didn't have time to make it any better, so they made it optional. The final thing that's different about your second trip to the impact site is that there are now bomb rocks under the slope, which you can use to open the rock wall on the far side of the boss arena. I'll avoid another long digression and talk more about bomb rocks later. Here you'll find a little pond with a bramble wall blocking a shortcut back to base. We will also discuss bramble walls later. Gotta draw a line somewhere. We already talked about the main engine, but this area is home to the impact site's only other ship part, the Positron
let me check my graphics packs again
blue Pikmin, as you'll
with
need
my
them
limited
to make the
inventory.
early Clan
It feels like
building it
I still have a lot.
Pikmin is an interesting game because I'm used to most games reusing enemies a whole lot. Yet this one is perfectly happy to give you an enemy one single time, then be done with it. Pearly Clam Clamps are a great example, as this pond is their one and only home in the entire game. These things are very simple, but they make for amazing Pikmin enemies if you ask me. In fact, their simplicity is their ultimate strength. Beating them is easy as heck.
I'll change it to
Just throw some
300,
Pikmin in
why
their
not?
mouths, and the little guys will get to work on whatever's inside. After a while, the Clam Clamp
But
will
I do
snap
believe
its
I'm
mouth shut
still
and eat
far
the
from
Pikmin,
reaching
so
that
you gotta
limit.
call them back before that happens. Easiest thing in the
At
world
5,
to
10,
beat
15,
Clam
20,
Clamps without even
40,
coming close to losing one Pikmin.
50.
You've always got plenty of time to blow that whistle. But this creature plays perfectly into two of Pikmin's conceptual pillars: time management and risk and reward. It's easy to kill a Pearly Clam Clamp, but it can take a heck of a long time to do it the safe way. The second a Pikmin touches its mouth, it begins its animation where it opens wider in preparation of the snap, and that's when the clock starts. Depending
I think
on how they
300
land,
is a
it
fair
can take
number.
a moment before the Pikmin start
I
attacking.
will still
and of
need
course,
it
its
will
health
just
drops
make the game way
faster
too
and
inconvenient
faster,
if I
depending on how
make
many
it any
Pikmin are on
lower.
it. This naturally pushes the player to take risks
With the
in
whole
reducing
selling and
time.
stuff.
Instead of just throwing a few Pikmin on there and chipping away at it, I inevitably end up throwing at a constant rate all the way up to the last second when I call them back. Sometimes they can take a moment to respond to the whistle, or they can get stuck on the other side of the pearl. So this is a very dangerous move. And of course, even a slight miscalculation can result in a substantial number of Pikmin deaths. It's a terrific dynamic. It's an enemy that is devious in its simplicity. The one Clam Clamp up on the bank can be killed using bomb rocks or red.
Oh my.
But the ones in the water have to be attacked with blues, slowing down the process even more. Fortunately, two of them give you pearls when defeated, which produce a whopping 50 Pikmin each, so losing a few of your little buds ain't too bad. Between those and all the huge pellets
How
in
have
the
I
area,
never
it's an
noticed this
amazing
when I
place
was
to boost
when
your
I
numbers.
first played the game?
Interestingly, when you defeat a
I passed through this
a
place.
little spirit leaves its body as with any enemy, but the shell keeps on working as though it's alive. Pretty strange. Maybe the shell and the inner organ are separate symbiotic creatures? It's Pikmin World. That's certainly possible. Anyway, defeating the right Pearly Clam Clamp will net you one shiny new positron generator. And I suppose this is as good a time as any to mention how not all of the ship parts are required to leave the planet. There are 5 optional ones, though I must say that I have 2 small issues with this system. One, that's such a small number of non-essential parts that it's basically impossible for anyone to get every required ship part but not get them as well, thus earning themselves the okay ending. We'll talk endings later. Like, you would have to use a guide and very purposefully avoid them, or just choose not to fight the last boss, and who's not really like the last boss. It's a good idea in theory, but it ends up not accomplishing much in this case. Second issue, based on Olimar's descriptions, it feels like way more of the parts should also be non-essential. I will admit, this is only a half-serious gripe. I mostly just like to point out how worthless some of these parts sound because I think it's funny. So as we go through every part, I will do just that, starting with the positron generator, which is a necessary part, even though its purpose is to produce electricity, and a different part, the eternal fuel dynamo, already produces unlimited power. So I'm not quite sure why Olimar needs it, but hey, I'm no tiny space bear. And now we come to the Forest of Hope. This is exciting because it's the
A
first
jumping
full
attack is
level
quite
in
stupid.
Lore. And even though it offers the player
I am
the first
drowning.
real dangers, it's undeniably laid back and peaceful. If the music in the Impact site was spunky and silly, now the music is
Now
much
you're learning.
softer. The kind of tune you want to listen to whilst crunching in the garden. The world of Pikmin most certainly is a spunky and silly one, but as I've gone on and on about, it's also beautiful and serene. And after the game's short introduction, it wastes no time going
Round 2. Damn.
Hope is
Thought
a
it was
very
over.
basic level. Not too much complicated stuff going on. But because it's so basic, it can focus hard on teaching the player just about all there is to know about the game's core concepts. The Impact site teaches how to play and how Pikmin work in a safe little bubble, and the Forest of Hope teaches everything else and with higher stakes. The training wheels are now off. There's a bit of a maze of different enemies scattered throughout, and numerous shortcuts to open up to make carrying things back to base easier. Interestingly, there are places where both you and your Pikmin can get through, so you've got free reign of an area, but nothing can be carried away until you open up a wall. I love the duality there. You can reach an area all you want, but if there's no open path for parts, it's not worth much yet. The first thing anyone's gonna do when they reach the Forest of Hope is break through this bramble wall. This is a very basic obstacle in Pikmin, and one that I'm sure will stick around forever, even if the name and appearance sometimes change between titles. A bramble wall is there to block your path and use up some of your time. And though simple, it plays an important part in the strategic aspect of the game. Naturally, the more Pikmin and overall attack power on a wall, the faster it will go down. If you've got a big
changed the
Pikmin
way
force, it might be
tablets
best
work.
to just tackle these as you come to them. But putting a
They really
Pikmin
nerfed the
in
bombs.
passing, then coming back later when they're done could potentially cut your wait time to effectively zero. Even here, in this first little area of the Forest of Hope, you're faced with a question. Is it better to get my Pikmin on the wall now, or would diverting some of them away to gather pellets and increase my numbers ultimately pay off more? The wall doesn't take long to bring down in either case, and as always, I might just be
Let me go
looking
cook
too
some
deep
stuff.
into this, but I'm fascinated
To prevent
by
getting
these little
rid of
strategic questions
potentially
we ask ourselves. And I love that the
imported
game
items in my
presents so
inventory.
many responses, even in these simplistic situations. Once this first wall is down, the great level is open to you, and sitting next to a little pond, just waiting for someone to pick it up, is the Eternal Fuel Dynamo, which is a required part because it creates endless supplies of fuel. Very nice. Consistent throughout the Pikmin series is having a few very easy collectibles for those who are still getting their bearings and don't want to fall
Since I
behind.
first level 3, dang it.
This part isn't absolutely free though, as there's a good chance you'll have a little run-in with a dwarf Bulborb or two. Olimar mentions later that this is not merely the juvenile form of a big Bulborb. It's a different species entirely that I guess has evolved to just look that way. Why did they decide to write this in? Especially this early in the game, and with
Right,
the most common
inventory.
enemies in the entire series. Why wouldn't they just go with the obvious choice? These are the adult ones, these are the baby ones. I really don't know. Though it does say a lot about the Pikmin team's dedication to making the game weird and interesting. And also a lot about the nature of the world they built. Over time and multiple games, we would come to see that the Pikmin world has some weirdly evolved animals. And adaptations like this are actually fairly common. Anyway, dwarf Bulbors are your most basic enemy. They stick to themselves, but if anyone gets too close, they'll walk up and give a chomp. As with any enemy, Pikmin will attack them automatically. But you learn pretty quick that chomp comes fast. It's like the very first thing they do. No wind up or anything. Just pow, they gotcha. And once a Pikmin is being chomped, you're on a timer. When the eating animation finishes, the Pikmin dies. However, until you hear that, the game ain't over. I've always thought it was pretty funny how it doesn't matter how many awful Pikmin body crunching noises you hear. If you can kill an enemy before the death noise, the Pikmin is saved and is none the worse for wear, save maybe some shed flower petals. Dwarf Bulborbs become a lot more dangerous when in groups, because then, even if you've got a whole army of Pikmin, you can still come at them from the wrong angle, or not use your swarm properly and end up losing a few Pikmin before each Bulborb is dead. Even a tiny enemy can and will eat the Pikmin of even the most experienced player if that player is not meticulous in taking them out. One nice thing, though, is that even if one single Pikmin lands exactly on top of a Dwarf Bulborb's head, it will kill it instantly.
Limiting my inventory makes the game feel like I'm playing a
Trick,
chill year,
but the
honestly.
hitbox is super small, and of course, if you miss, your Pikmin is now within chomping range. To prevent this chompage,
Yeah, I'll go
the
for
obvious
100.
answer is to throw a
I believe
bunch
this
of
used to
Pikmin
be my
and hope
old
that
limit.
At least one of them land.
Let's see how it
But
goes.
if the thing starts moving and you miss all of those as well,
I'm definitely
you're
gonna lose some
basically
stuff, so I may as well
guaranteed
sell.
to lose 1 or 2 Pikmin before they can take it out. Once more, even with the most basic
Actually,
of
the
enemies,
monster
game
part,
offers several
yeah.
dangers and options and risks to take. And one
300
final
it
thing,
is.
just to make the battle with this little bug-eyed dude even more tense. Dwarf Bulborbs are very often found right next to their large, apparently unrelated lookalikes. The regular old Spotty Bulborb, the most iconic Pikmin enemy, is this area's apex predator. Spotty Bulborbs are nocturnal and have free reign at night, which is exactly why you have to leave the surface at sundown. But they sleep during the day so you can potentially avoid detection. The game doesn't leave you guessing what the world is like at night. It's quite easy to imagine it overrun with these things. During the day, you're safe as long as they're asleep, but there's always the fear of accidentally waking them up. When dealing with one of them, you don't want a Dwarf Bulborb to come along and start going to town on your Pikmin because you don't have the time to deal with it when you're already dealing with a much larger crisis, so you want to take out the dwarves first. But the whole time you do, you're super scared that you're gonna get too close to the Big Mama and wake it up. This teaches us about how combining enemies can change the gameplay dynamic drastically. We could analyze individual enemies all day, but we would miss out on some key stuff by not observing how enemies
my
must
max
be dealt
item
with
slot
when in
is
close
4
proximity
pages.
to other enemies. Back to Bulborbs, though. Assuming you're looking at a sleeping Bulborb with no other distractions, you're looking at Pikmin combat in a nutshell. This is a big, nasty creature, and it has the capacity to eat several Pikmin at once and keep coming back for more if you let it. If you know the trick to beating it, you can take it out without effort. You got enough Pikmin on you? You can just sneak up behind and swarm it. It'll wake up, get stunned a bit, then its health will reach 0 before it can do anything. Seems simple enough. Yeah, not much of an enemy if you can kill it that easily, is it? Well, remember what we talked about with the Pearly Clam Clamp? Taking risks in order to save time is the name of the game. And you're not always going to have 100 flowered breads on you every time you need to get a Bulborb out of your way. Inevitably, you'll try with fewer Pikmin, or with more yellows and blues. And eventually, your luck will run out. They won't keep it stunned long enough, and once it breaks free of that stun, it will start chowing down. At this point, you lose 2 or 3 Pikmin every few seconds, but since the thing is now standing up and scattering your troop, and they can't easily access its body anymore, your instinct might be to throw Pikmin onto its body manually to do the last bit of damage needed. This naturally takes time, and all the while, you're also trying to call your Pikmin back and move them away so it can't eat them. It's a great, big, panicky mess, and I live for it. In Pikmin, when a situation goes wrong, it can really go wrong. And that dynamic is just thrilling. Heck, even when you're sure you've got enough Pikmin, because you just killed 2 other Bulborbs with them? I don't know if it's some very subtle player error, or just the game randomly deciding to mess with you, but sometimes that swarm just won't quite work right. Not enough of the Pikmin will attack it fast enough. It won't stay stunned quite long enough. And all it takes is that one teeny tiny misaligned variable to create a few moments of delicious carnage. Even when you think you're safe, you're never really safe. Again, unless you're willing to never touch a single enemy unless you've got 100 flowered breads, but who's gonna do that? The option to be meticulous is always there, but taking risks is where the thrill lies. You won't be in the Forest of Hope long at all before you find the yellow onion, and you're able to start building up your little yellow army. In any game, I love starting with very little and working my way up. As such, I am endlessly entertained by the act of starting with just 1 Pikmin and multiplying.
Alright, here we go.
Even trying to make as many new ones as possible on my first day with the new color.
I can follow the black guy.
So darn satisfying. Anyway, we've talked about yellows already, but now let's talk more about Bomb Rocks. This is the most touchy and finicky and potentially catastrophic mechanic in the entire game. For this reason, it's actually a little weird that they expose you to it so early. I mean, it's your first real day with the game. The sun is still high. You find the yellows, and then bam! Here are some Bomb Rocks and rock walls. Have fun. Hope you don't blow yourself up. I guess they just wanted yellows to be utilized early on, and breaking rock walls is a pretty integral part of the game, so why not get on with the concept right away? Anyone who's played this game knows exactly
They better
what
not
I
turn
mean
into
when I say
skeletons.
bomb rocks are touchy and finicky.
That's the
but
real
let's
risk.
look at just why that is. If you
Sneak
dismiss
strikes are
your
way
pick,
too
any
overpowered
yellows
of a
holding
strategy
bomb
anyway, so
rocks
this is
will form
nice.
their own little group. From here, you can bump them or
It's a
throw
nice
them.
risk-reward
Throw
thing
a Pikmin,
with the
however,
strategy.
you have to bump it to get it back into your party, because calling it will make it drop its bomb rock, which will explode shortly after. This means you have to keep track of who was dismissed and who was thrown, which is, in my opinion, extremely clumsy design. Similarly, bomb rock carrying Pikmin that climb sticks count as ones who are thrown. This is something you just have to figure out yourself and remember. And of course, one small mistake anywhere in the process can get your Pikmin blown up, so you gotta handle these things with utmost care. Honestly, I'm pretty torn on bomb rocks. It's a cool concept, it gives yellows something else to do, and it creates another obstacle you have to overcome. But it adds a level of stress to the game that I don't think is as fun as most of the other stress. You know, it's a little scary to have bomb rocks in my party, so I usually just end up going out and doing all the bomb rock related stuff
Alright, this is
with
useful.
nothing but a small group of yellows.
It's got good durability, so it'll last. So
Such a pain,
it'll be
especially when you're
it'll be
taking
all
down
reliable
dark
for a
stone
while.
walls that require 6 or 9 bomb rocks each. You've got to throw in small waves. Then each time you've got to re-dismiss and re-bump your Pikmin to keep them split up.
Only
This
800?
once again highlights the game's big sword issue. The problem is even more
expected I'd
pronounced when you're trying to manage bomb
suffer
rocks.
more shield
You
damage.
can try grabbing one and holding down A to sort them all behind you, but as always, that's not super reliable. Mistakes will still be common. This whole thing just leads to way more dismissing and micromanaging than I feel we should have to do. Anyway, back to bomb rocks themselves. They're the only thing that can take down rock walls. And it's nice that they can also be used on bramble walls, just to save a little more time, especially with the black ones, which take a long time to bring down otherwise. Bombs can also be used on enemies, which is cool. The problem is that while you can throw as many Pikmin as you want at a wall and they'll all drop their bomb rocks, only one Pikmin at a time will loose a bomb rock at a baddie. The rest will all just run back to you. And instead of just dropping the rock, they'll back up and do this whole slow throwing animation. If you try to use bomb rocks on something like a sleeping Volborb, by the time the first bomb goes off, the thing is already awake and starts to report you. And if you've got a bunch of bomb rocks in your party, then you're probably not in a position to start throwing Pikmin around to fight it. Maybe this was their way of making sure that bomb rocks weren't overpowered? I don't know. So bomb rocks are helpful, but also sort of aggravating. And I don't think anyone's ever played this game without having at least one horrific, army-destroying bomb rock-related catastrophe. Though, in fairness, while I mostly try to avoid catastrophes, they do make for good stories, don't they? Again, risk is part of the thrill, so I can't say I don't enjoy the danger at least a little. One last thing to note about bomb rocks is that they're always found inside things. In the Forest of Hope is old cans, one of the clearest signs of human life on the planet. Where do bomb rocks even come from? Are they somehow produced in these objects by some creature? Does a creature bring them here? Maybe bomb rocks are actually eggs of some animal we haven't met, and it's their babies that we're exploding for our own self-serving purposes? Yet
We eat
another
eggs
fun Pikmin-related
anyway.
mystery to ponder.
This isn't the worst thing we've ever done.
To get in the Forest of Hope is the whimsical radar, which is just sort of sitting up on a ledge. And again, I must call into question just how mandatory some of these mandatory ship parts are. You need a radar just to get off this planet? That doesn't make a lot of sense. But I don't know, maybe he needs it to find his way home or something? Maybe, I don't know. Anyway, the whimsical radar does give you a map though, so that's good. It was nice of them to let us keep track of the whole level, all the parts, and all Pikmin locations so early on in the game. Gosh, it's almost too helpful. I guess the idea of parts being hidden just wasn't something they were interested in with this one. The trick isn't finding them, just earning them. So at this point in the level, you've fought through multiple Volborbs and Dwarf Volborbs. You've obtained a new color of Pikmin, and you've probably even messed around with bomb rocks some. But now it's time to learn a brand new lesson, and it is a juicy one. Yeah, you think you got things figured out? You think you understand the whole risk and reward dynamic? You know how to mitigate risk and lower your chances of catastrophe? You just have to have a cool head and attack every problem from the right angle and you'll be fine? Okay, well, then how about enemies that come out of nowhere? Here in the back of the area, you'll find sheer grubs, which come up out of the ground to eat your Pikmin. And in later levels, you'll find sheer wigs, which do the same, except they fly and you've got to knock them down. When you've played through the game enough times, you start to remember where each pack is, and as long as you're cognizant, you can respond appropriately when they pop up. But when they take you unaware, especially when it's your first time playing, it can be a bloodbath. Because who would expect such a thing to happen? Who could see it coming? No one! It's trial and error, and that's just how Pikmin be sometimes. The world is unpredictable, and predators taking their prey off guard is the entire point, isn't it? Even when you're aware of these things, as with just about anything else, your Pikmin can still slip through the cracks and get eaten if your attack doesn't land just perfectly. There are simply too many hungry mouths to keep track of if you go with the swarm strategy. And this first encounter, even beyond just teaching the player how unexpected things can happen, I love how it presents you with a situation where you just sort of have to go for it. Some dangerous situations can be retreated from. Like maybe you wake up a sleeping Bulborb and you just manage to call everyone back before it can take the first bite. But sometimes when something bad is happening to you, you've just got to commit and hope for the best. You gotta plunge right into that danger, because once your Pikmin are being eaten, you're on a clock. When a whole herd of shearwigs pops up and suddenly your Pikmin are surrounded, you just gotta make the call to start swarming all over the place. These scenarios are very invigorating. It makes you feel like you're really in a little war with another army and you're just throwing yourself at the enemy. Unless you decide to panic and try calling everyone away while several of them are already being eaten. But that's your choice. Every lesson is a good one. Even outside of direct confrontations with these things, though, perhaps the most dangerous scenario of all is if you neglect to clear a path of sheer grubs and shearwigs and then send your Pikmin down that path with spoils. You don't even realize your mistake until you see those numbers start to go down and you have to run and try and figure out what's going wrong. It's wonderful. It's such a dangerous world, and it's wonderful. And it's worth noting, this is likely the first time a player will learn that they can hear Pikmin dying no matter where they are on the map, and that there's a reason you can see how many Pikmin are out there at all times. When that number goes down and you have no idea why, the sense of panic it instills is intense. It becomes a desperate dash to find out who's being killed and put a stop to it. Nothing makes you feel more vulnerable, more like your sense of control has been compromised. Another small aside, but it's around this point in the level when I tend to reach the limit of 100 Pikmin in my party. And I just want to point out that there is something very satisfying about hitting that limit. I've spent plenty of time with full parties by now, obviously. There's something about there we go whenever I get there. And the first time playing the game especially, it's this big, empowering feeling. Similarly to when you first pick up the engine in the impact site, hitting 100 Pikmin makes you go, yeah, I am strong! I can carry anything! I can beat anything! And also, it's just fun to look at. Oh, look at all of them. Gosh, they're so cute. They're an army of cute! One unusual downside to having 100 Pikmin, though, is that very frequently when some Pikmin die and you sprout up to 100 again, Olimar will give the same little message about how you can only have 100 Pikmin on the field. It's, I've made another Pikmin-related discovery, again and again and again. It's got to be a bug, because no other tips do that. Usually you only need to hear a thing once, but for whatever reason, Olimar just can't stop talking about how you can only have 100 Pikmin on the field. Weird. Anyway, the next part to grab is the Extraordinary Bolt, which is a required part, and though its use is not obvious, I can see any bolt being pretty darn important, so I'll give it that. Part is behind a black stone wall. A little surprising that they put an extra strong black one so early on, but again, I guess they just wanted to get the whole bomb rock business rolling. Real quick though, speaking of yellow usefulness, curiously enough, despite the developer's eagerness to show off the yellow Pikmin's bomb rocking abilities, there are no parts in the level that are up on ledges or otherwise require yellows to reach using their extra height. Right here next to base, there's a 20 pellet posy you need them to reach, but that's it. Just seems a little weird to me. By the time you get to the next area and need yellows to get up on a ledge, it's like, oh, whoa, yeah, high ledges. I forgot about that. Up to that point, it's mostly just bombs and walls. Weird. Next up, we've got the Nova Blaster, which is also just sort of sitting behind some Bulborbs, so you gotta work your way through them to get it. There's no chance of sneaking it away. This part has appropriately been labeled as non-mandatory, seeing as it's just a weapon. But can we take a moment to read this description, though? Blast can travel in the currents of space-time, smashing through stars and into the rifts of space. What the heck, man? Why do you have a weapon of mass destruction on your ship? Destroying stars means destroying entire solar systems and potentially entire planets of life in the process. And it's because you need to fire it at one space pirate? Has Olimar used this? How many stars has he obliterated? How many civilizations has he turned to dust? We should leave this here. I have to believe that none of this is true and that it's just a bit of marketing for the pamphlet or something. He mentions other parts in the same light, so maybe this thing really is just a simple phaser made for murdering ships full of people, but nothing more. Also, while we're off on a silly tangent, I like to imagine that the space pirates he refers to are literally the same space pirates from Metroid, and the two series share a universe, and the space pirates are the only Metroid race that have come in contact with Hawkitations, and they fight
Why the hell are
Choo
Choo so goddamn powerful?
escaping battles with these giant vessels through all sorts of tiny cartoon hijinks. Whenever Olimar shows up, it's like a Tom and Jerry episode. Or, you know, I guess he could be using that Nova Blaster. Maybe that's why
I'm getting
so
armor.
destructive, so it can take out ships literally millions of times bigger than his. Anyway, though...
At least I kept my souls, but damn, my batteries.
This part offers a good example of needing to use different strategies depending on what Pikmin are available to you, and also of having to get Olimar and the Pikmin somewhere using different means. If you want to wait until you've got blues, then it's simple. You just gotta bring them through the water and up this kind of annoying slope. Why did they make it like this? Then take out the sleeping Bulborb, if you can trust your blues to get the job done, and grab the part. If you want the part early, though, you can throw your reds up onto this ledge before taking Olimar off himself. Of course, then you've got to throw a ton of them if you want to take out the Bulborb easily, and you've got to sneak around the thing when you're grabbing them. Nothing incredibly complicated, but like many scenarios, it can go very, very wrong. I kinda like this idea of having one intended method, but giving players a more time-consuming and or riskier method if they want the job done early. I kinda wish there were more situations like this. The shock absorber itself is a mandatory part, even though from the description, it sounds like it just makes the ride more comfortable. My only guess is that it also negates more serious shaking that would damage the ship at high speeds, and Olimar just doesn't mention it? Maybe? Also a note about getting this part, up on this ledge you'll find these little rocks that your Pikmin obsessively break to reveal nectar. They are functionally identical to grass, and I'm not exactly sure why they exist. I mean, I guess the fact that they're rocks means the developers can put them in places where grass can't grow, like on cement or other rocks, I guess? Not sure. But yeah, it's just more grass for you. Happy birthday. Now here's one of my favorite parts in the area. I mean, really, so many of them are just lying around and you've only got to get them past the enemies scattered about. So anything more involved is very much welcome. Even if it's probably not necessarily intended to be more involved. There's this box you've got to push out of the way, but in a clever twist on the idea, it can only be pushed from the other side. You're supposed to come back later with blues so you can throw them up from the water. I say supposed to, though, because with some clever maneuvering, you can just chuck reds or yellows over the box and they'll move it instead. What am I? Super Metroid speedrunner or something? Like and subscribe for more chats like this. Anyway, once the box is gone, you get another fun little taste of how annoying it is to bring big groups of Pikmin over narrow paths. Naturally, you want to bring reds for the coming battle, assuming you're aware of it, so anyone who falls over the side is going to drown. Even bringing them over in small groups can lead to some accidental deaths. And furthermore, when you leave them on the other side, you run the risk of attracting the attention of our first boss. I love boss battles! This area is home to not to one, not to two, but three burrowing snaggers. One of Pikmin's strangest creatures. This thing has a bird head on a snake body and burrows, because of course it does. The simple image of that head on that body all wiggling around is wonderfully bizarre. And I tell you, if you're trying to avoid Pikmin deaths, these things can be tough. Once they pop out of the ground, they start gobbling up your Pikmin, and since their bodies are almost impervious to damage, all you can do is chuck Pikmin at their heads. If a Snagret grabs on to any Pikmin, the only way to save them is to kill the Snagret before it swallows or retreats underground. It's definitely possible to try to keep your Pikmin away from
The lit campfire beneath this place has always fascinated me.
To throw your Pikmin at it, and any that miss
Some
its head
mystery.
are now in the danger zone.
Who put
You
that
can wait
there?
until it pecks,
It's
then
convenient.
throw only one or two, so you're less likely to miss, but such a strategy will take a long time. To get the job done in something even resembling good time, you gotta just sort of dive in there, and that's what makes this thing particularly exciting to fight.
Oh, I
If you're
forgot
not
about
on
the power
ball
up.
with your throws,
I'm gonna get
one
it.
Snagret can gobble up 3 Pikmin at a time, multiple times before you can bring it down, and each of its friends will do the same. Fortunately, it does have one very helpful behavior. Whenever it burrows, there's always the chance that when it comes back up again, its head will get stuck halfway out of the dirt for a moment. If you're prepared, you can swarm its head and deal a ton of damage without throwing a thing. This mostly only happens near the end of the battle though, so it's not something you can completely depend on if you're trying to hurry. And seriously, it's really funny that the designers
How are the
decided to
Cryonis
just
blocks
randomly
able to
take one of the game's bosses
withstand
and you can find
flowing,
3 of them.
fast-moving
Running those 3
water
throughout
currents
the
like
game
that
might have made more sense
and not
given us another
move,
reason to stay on our
much
toes,
less
but
shatter.
nah, they decided this is the Snagret place. Hey, I mean, it's certainly interesting, isn't it? Makes for an interesting encounter, that's for sure. Once Snagrets are defeated, they don't leave behind bodies. And I really don't know what made the devs decide which baddies got bodies and which didn't. Might have been a development time saver, who knows. They do, however, drop a ton of pellets, which makes for the sort of
Right,
sight
this
that
Starship
I
Jet is
live
guaranteed to
for
be the
when I
Morocco.
play Pikmin. Tons of Pikmin
I just
carrying
need the-
tons of
I just
stuff
need the
back to
key.
base in an adorable little line. Why is it so delightful? I do not know. Though I will say, it's a bit annoying that only blue Pikmin are willing to carry their
I'll go for
spoils off
defense.
this ledge here. It seems like it was made specifically to act as a shortcut back to base, and there is indeed plenty
Why
of
the
room to
hell
walk down onto dry land. But for some reason, non-blue Pikmin
do you guys have
go
such
all
weapons
the way back
at
to
your
where
possessions?
they said. The preferred tag of Pikmin, and their inconsistent choosing of those tags is sometimes a little annoying, as we'll see later. As for the parts you get from one of the snaggers, the Geiger counter is another one of those parts that's mandatory but doesn't see. Olimar says the thing just makes a bunch of noise sometimes and he doesn't even know what it does, which is a joke about how he doesn't realize he's being bombarded with radiation. But the radiation doesn't seem to be doing anything to him, so it's hard to believe that it's just going to blow up and he'll fail to get home. Finally, there are 2 parts in the area that require Pikmin to get, so naturally you have to come back for them later in the game. The first one is funny. When I was less familiar with the game, I would always build this bridge even though there's clearly nothing on the other side, and you clearly need to get through the water before you can build a second bridge which connects to this ledge. I just have this compulsion to build it. Like, I would ignore the fact that it didn't do anything for me, and I'd get to the other side before I was like, oh, yeah, I guess there's no point to this, huh? Telling the story out loud, this probably is just a me thing, and now I'm embarrassed. But if anyone else has ever done the same thing, I applaud the design. It's a bit of a trick based entirely on how satisfying it is to build bridges, or to perform any automated task with your Pikmin for that matter. You see a bridge, you want to build it. Figuring out where it actually goes is secondary. Once you do make it over these bridges, you'll find the Sagittarius, which has no obvious purpose, but I have to assume it's just not noted. Instead,
They
you
go
get
to
a very
sleep.
sweet blurb about how Olimar's son gave the part to him. These constant reminders of what's at stake do a wonderful job of making us empathize with Olimar as a character. And how often can you say that about a character in a cartoony Nintendo game? It's worth noting that since you had to build the bridges to get the part, of course your Pikmin won't be able to carry it off the ledge and through the water, even if only Blues are carrying it, because that's just how it works, darn it! Oh, also worth noting, this pond is home to a few Wogpoles. Wogpoles are non-aggressive, and in fact will do nothing but run from you and your Pikmin. I think this is a very interesting and alert creature, because even though they're innocent, you can kill them and harvest their bodies all the same. That's how the world works, right? It's dog-eat-dog. But it's not like you actually need the tiny handful of Pikmin they provide, so is it right to kill them? Is Olimar completely neutral about the lives of any creatures other than Pikmin, simply because Pikmin help him and the others don't? How many unneeded deaths are caused by Olimar? This is an alien planet. Just because they look like tadpoles doesn't mean they're nothing more than tadpoles. For all he knows, these are sapient creatures, capable of rational thought and language and empathy. And here he is, murdering them in their homes even as they try to escape. Is Olimar, in fact, a sociopathic monster? That's what I thought until I learned that Wogpoles are juvenile Wollywogs, and now I destroy every last one on sight. That's more Wollywogs later. The final part in the area leads you to another boss fight. You can throw reds or yellows up onto this ledge, but you need blues to break a gate submerged in water for Olimar to get up as well. I must say, this is a pretty clever mixing of obstacles that I do enjoy. The game could have used more stuff like this. After breaking another gate, you face off against the Armored Cannon Beetle. Like many great Pikmin enemies, this thing is pretty simple if you know the right strategy, still dangerous even if you do, and potentially catastrophic if you don't. Its shell is impervious to damage, and it blasts giant boulders at you that can kill even an army of Pikmin instantly. The only way to beat it is to throw a Pikmin into its sniffy tube snoot, for lack of a better term, when it's preparing to shoot out a boulder. If you're successful, it'll open up its carapace and you can throw Pikmin onto its exposed back for a short time. I love this thing, because exploiting its weakness involves facing it head on.
Alright.
Right in its face, just as it's about to blast
I can blow them up now.
You've got to have all your Pikmin with you,
worry.
or else it'll just blast them instead. So it's you and your entire army staring down that barrel. Makes me feel like a cowboy or something. If your aim and timing are good, and you don't hesitate on the throw, the Cannon Beetle does become pretty darn easy. But I've made plenty of mistakes and had my fair share of blasted Pikmin, don't get me wrong. I have to say, I also love the look of this thing. Bugs are already oogly, but this one is just so massive and intimidating, with its jet black shell and its stocky legs. Like, can you imagine seeing this thing in real life? And it's like as big as a football, and all stomping around and gross? Ew! Love it! One interesting thing about this fight is that the beetle doesn't actually have the part inside it as with most bosses. The part's off to the side. I thought this was weird until I realized that it creates a fun opportunity to try and sneak the part away while you distract the beetle. Is this necessary? Absolutely not. But little challenges like this can be amusing from time to time. And I do believe that encouraging such a strategy was purposeful on the part of the designers. Sometimes just giving the player an option makes them want to explore it. I know I've tried sneaking the part away once or twice. The part in question is the radiation canopy, which is mandatory, and funny enough, sounds mandatory, until you read Olimar's description. You're like, radiation? Yeah, you gotta protect yourself, right? And then he's like, this will be pleasant. I'll sleep like a baby after this. As though radiation is nothing more than a slight discomfort. Pretty funny. By the time a player is ready to move on from the Forest of Hope, they've likely learned how ship parts tend to work. Specifically, while enemy bodies and any other consumable items disappear overnight, parts always stay just where they are. This is very convenient, and of course, it makes narrative sense. Why would their position just be set for no reason? Though, as an aside, wouldn't it be fun if the parts you haven't gotten to base yet could be eaten by other baddies, and you had to go and find them and beat them to get the parts back. Could be kind of cool in a future game. Anyway, it's also a mystery. The dolphin starts to
Imagine
look
make a
a little
campfire.
more organic, and I
Nick, give me a
love
key.
this whole concept. When you start out, the ship is positively skeletal, and while not every part is
guts are
visible
fine.
on the ship, enough are to give you a very tangible sense of progression as you collect them. It's very satisfying to watch the ship come together, slowly looking more and more like an actual pilotable spaceship. Then, naturally, that feeling of progression is also very strong when you earn enough ship parts to unlock a new area. You don't need specific parts, you just need the right number. And being able to choose which parts you collect is another one of those little details that makes the adventure feel like it's being led by you. You're the one earning the ability to reach each successive level. Even after playing the game dozens of times, there's still this tiny little rush of excitement when I get the last part I need to move on. It's just a very effective system, and mechanically it allows a player to pick and choose what's easiest for them and come back later when they're feeling more confident. While we're talking about parts though, I will say it's annoying how you're interrupted by a little animation every time you collect a new part. I'm kinda torn because I do like to see each part fill in the ship, like I said, and you wouldn't quite get that if you just had a summary of collected parts at the end of the day. It's especially nice when you unlock a level and you get to see the fun little victory animation. But man, it is a pain to be in the middle of fighting an enemy or doing something tricky, and suddenly everything pauses. Especially if it happens multiple times in quick succession. It really throw off your groove, you know? And with that, we are done with the Forest of Home. We've still got a lot of ground to cover though, so let's make for that little cave in the heart of the forest.
Looks like the maracas will have to wait again. Or not. Another 8-fold long
Now
blade.
it's time to cover
Aha!
what is probably the most stressful level for me when I was a teenager, but has since become my favorite. The Forest Navel is unlike any other level in any Pikmin game. Pikmin 2 has its kind of smaller cave floors, and 3 has a few small caves as well, but the entire Navel takes place in a dark, dank, and dangerous cave. This is obviously a very big change from the bright, beautiful area you just came from, and it makes for some very fun atmospheric progression. It's clear now that just about every area of the game represents a different facet of the Pikmin world. Pikmin is spunky, it's serene, and it's also pretty scary. In the Navel, your base is illuminated, but everything else falls into pure blackness in every direction. First arriving is just so intimidating. You don't want to leave that little island of safety and plunge into the darkness below. Your imagination runs wild, wondering what lies beyond those
Right, what's
visible
most
borders.
important are weapon
You can
slots.
just make out glowing mushrooms in the distance. The music works wonders to strengthen this more dark, moody atmosphere. Mostly slide guitars, it starts in with some long, slow notes, just to set the mood before getting into something of a melody. It doesn't sound sinister by any means, but it's a far cry from the themes of the previous two areas. It communicates, alright, playtime's over. You're getting into some stuff now. The level is doubly intimidating because it features so many ledges sort of staircasing down from the base, with numerous stone walls to get through and bridges to build. Thematically, I just love that the whole level builds out from this central area, which is high up. It makes it stand out a lot, even when compared to levels in future games.
Quotes.
Stand out a lot, even when compared to levels in future games. You don't usually get one super strong theme cutting through a whole area like this. And you also don't usually get this much musicality. But this also makes the Navel very unique mechanically. You can get away with only opening one or two paths. Your Pikmin will still be able to carry things back home. But it will take a lot longer, so you gotta decide how much effort you want to put into opening things up. Going and hunting down bomb rocks can be tricky because the area is packed with baddies, so you either gotta spend a ton of time sweeping everything first, or just grab a little bit
Where'd the
of
weapons
and
go?
break for the bomb rocks.
Oh,
Yes. I just love how
I
you're
don't care
constantly
anymore.
asking yourself, yourself which is more efficient in the long run. Taking the time to make the area more manageable to traverse, or just jumping in and traveling via these long...
Yeah, they were running.
The Forest Stable is where you finally get blue Pikmin, and it's surprising how easy this is. I think my own instinct tells me you should make the player work for something. I really love delayed satisfaction, working toward making myself stronger so it's all the sweeter when I get that new ability. But I guess in the same way they wanted us to have yellows pretty much immediately on the first real day, they didn't want to make us wait too much longer for blues. They wanted us to just have them and get moving. Hey, it's a short game. I suppose I can't blame them. So all you gotta do is drop down a few ledges and boom, blue onion. And if you play your cards right, you'll have plenty of time for that onion. Because seriously, there are so many creatures here for the fighting. The space around your face is pretty safe, but down in the deeper cave area, it's a stinking nightmare. Before we get to the actual baddies, though, it's worth talking about how now we've got to deal with non-enemy hazards. Fire geysers stick up from the ground in rather inconvenient places, and these are exactly what you would expect based on the name. Fire geysers. They'll waste no time burninating your Pikmin and hurting Olimar as well if you're not careful. And here's something I frequently forget. Fire hurts Olimar. Okay, I get it. I'll just make sure to stay away from fire geysers and to...
I have no idea why I talked to her.
I
have no need.
No. These things are incredibly dangerous because they can stun lock you. You can be in the middle of a day, everything is going great, you've gotten 2 parts already, and you're on your way to getting a 3rd. Then you graze a fire geyser, and lights out. If Olimar's health reaches 0, the day ends automatically, and you lose all the Pikmin outside the safe zone as though it were sundown, plus all the units in your party. Talk about a catastrophe. And it's not just a ton of deaths, it's also a ton of wasted time depending on how much day you have left. I haven't spent more time talking about Olimar and his health bar because it doesn't really come up too much as long as you're decently careful. I've found that just about every other source of damage in the game is pretty easy to keep Olimar away from, at least enough to not lose all your health. But fire geysers are the one real threat in his life. The tiniest mistake can lock you in place and wipe out your party. It's pretty brutal. Fire geysers are just the start of it, though. Narrower paths here will surprise you with shearwigs again and again. Then, in the center of this bigger area, you'll find several of 2 enemy types. One is the fiery blowhog. These little chunkers shoot fire, and while a lot of media portraying fire-breathing creatures doesn't really bother explaining why they're able to breathe fire, Olimar notes that fiery blowhogs spray out a phosphor that ignites at low temperatures. That's a really thoughtful little detail. I love it. Back to the point, though, these things alternate between spraying fire and bucking to get any attachment off. If your party contains nothing but reds, the blowhog can't kill any of them itself. It will, quite annoyingly, knock their flowers off when it bucks them, but that's it. However, as we talked about before, a Pikmin baddie does not exist in a bubble. The real danger comes when you combine its abilities with what's around it. The fiery blowhogs are all next to this big lake, so you've got to be careful that they don't dump your Pikmin right into the water. Even without considering the water, though, the buck can make them fly all over, up onto ledges. It's easy to lose track of where they've gone. Fiery blowhogs still aren't super hard or anything, but they become very annoying when your fight attracts the attention of the other main member of this area. I am referring to the Wollywog. These might just be the most aggravating and deceptively dangerous creatures in the Pikmin world. They come in 2 types, regular and yellow, with differences in jumping distance and health, but if you ask me, they're both awful. They seem simple enough. They're a very basic baddie that anyone could have come up with. You get close to them, they jump in and try to squish you. Should only be a matter of throwing Pikmin at them or rushing them when they're down, right? Oh, buddy, I wish it were. The first problem comes down to a concept that I call deadliness potential. When a creature is allowed to attack your Pikmin at full speed without you moving or fighting back, at what rate does it kill your Pikmin? That is the creature's deadliness potential. How fast can this thing take out Pikmin? How many can it kill with one attack? When figuring out how deadly a creature actually is, however, you've naturally also got to consider how easy it is to avoid this attack. If a creature can eat 100 Pikmin at once, but the move takes 20 seconds to prepare so it never actually lands, that creature's effective deadliness is pretty darn low. I don't have an exact system of stats here. It's just sort of an awareness of how dangerous each enemy is. Another one of those things that I didn't really think about until I started really thinking about this game. The point is, though, if you sort Pikmin baddies into 4 size categories, small, medium, large, and boss, Wollywogs fit into the medium category with fiery blowhogs. This should, in theory, put them on the lower half of the deadliness potential scale. Size, rarity, and deadliness should all correlate, right? Blowhogs have a high base deadliness potential because they can toast a whole army all in one go, but it's pretty easy to hit them with reds, and you can always call Pikmin to save them from burning. Effectively, they're decently dangerous, like more dangerous than a dwarf Bulborb, but still not large enemy or boss dangerous, so there are a lot of them around. Wollywogs, then? They aren't that big at all, and they're plentiful, so in theory, they should only be mildly deadly, like blowhogs, and yet, this medium-sized, rather common enemy's deadliness potential is up there with the game's bosses. For another comparison, before we dig into the matter, look at this Bulbear. I would classify this as a large enemy. It's very deadly. And yet, even the Bulbear is considerate enough to grab only a few Pikmin per mouthful. Plus, if it's got some in its mouth, you can kill it to save them. A bad run-in with the Bulbear means losing like 10 or 15 Pikmin tops if you're decently prepared. But the Wollywog? What was that? Sorry, I can't hear you over the sound of 1 trillion Pikmin dying at once! The Wollywog does not choose to only squish 2 or 3 Pikmin at a time out of the goodness of its heart. The entire area underneath it is a 100% no recovery instant kill zone. The deadliness potential of its attack is limited only by its size. And no, the attack isn't very easy to avoid completely, at least not when you're engaged in combat. I tell you, considering how common these things are and how wide their attention radius is, their kill output is just absurd. I mean, they've probably got the widest radius of any enemy. Making matters much worse, though, they are deceptively tricky to fight. As with enemies, the Wollywog can knock down Pikmin. This stun ability prevents them from moving for a moment. Pikmin are thrown off and stunned whenever they're attached to a Wollywog and it lands. Also, as with many enemies, if the Pikmin aren't called after they're done being stunned, they'll run back and continue to fight it. This will inevitably lead to them being squished by the next jump. It's bad enough that you got them to worry about, but any Pikmin that missed the mark when thrown will also try to attack the thing and end up getting squished. The window for throwing Pikmin onto its head is very small, so managing all this at once can be very difficult. The obvious solution, then, is to swarm a Wollywog, right? In theory, yes. As with Bulborbs, getting attacked by many Pikmin at once will cause it to be momentarily stunned. You can even see it struggling to move. But no matter what, that stun is on a timer. It doesn't matter how many Pikmin are holding it down. After long enough, it will jump straight up in the air and come right back down on the stunned Pikmin it shook off when it did. Because that's right, it doesn't just stun them when it lands. It also stuns any Pikmin attacking it from the side when it jumps. Get 100 flowered reds together, and yeah, you'll probably make quick work of a Wollywog by swarming it. But as we must remind ourselves, we don't always have the perfect Pikmin team when we need it, and Wollywogs are most often found in the water. Times will inevitably come when you need to take these things out, or at least you want to take them out with the team you've got. As with Bulborbs, you can always take the risk and swarm, but Wollywogs are unpredictable. Their attack patterns change, and failure to take them out in time can be positively catastrophic. And all of this put together leads to a very chaotic.
Hey, the fairies are back to being in the normal inventory slot.
It's not like Wollywogs are rare either.
So that means you can do the duplication glitch with them.
It's just so wide. So you can try to ignore them or get around them, but they will inevitably come and try to wreck your day. I mean, I've had more wildly disastrous encounters with these things than with probably any other enemy in any Pikmin game. They are miserable, and I hate them. Because danger and unpredictability are naturally a big part of what I love about Pikmin. But mostly I hate them. If anything, one great thing about them is that they really demonstrate how complex combat in Pikmin can be. All of this stuff I've been describing can take place within seconds. They require precise movements and constant split-second decisions. If you want a quote-unquote safe way to fight them, you gotta wait until they land. Throw a few Pikmin on their heads, wait for them to jump, start throwing more right when they land, quickly call the Pikmin who were knocked off, and repeat for a while until they are dead. And even that's not necessarily safe, because your aim has to be very precise and your movements quick. There's still plenty that can go wrong. And in true Pikmin fashion, even when you're trying to be careful, you might end up becoming impatient and throwing yourself into some risks. It's only got a tiny bit of health left. It's probably okay to swarm now. Some of these risks will pay off, and some will lead to naught but death. Because even when you think you've won the battle, the Wollywog has one last trick up its sleeve. If it's in the middle of a jump animation when its health reaches 0, it won't die until it's completed that animation and squished any Pikmin underneath it. You know, just as one last little party gift. Thanks, you horrible frog monster. It's kind of funny how sometimes Wollywogs will drop 5 pellets when they die.
Alright, 15 armor points.
Right? Well, I think this might be the developers
That'll
saying,
increase my
"We know
survivability."
these guys are a huge pain and probably just killed 40 of your Pikmin. Have a little something extra for your trouble." It's like they realized super late into development how unreasonably deadly Wollywogs were. Just kind of threw us a bone. So as you can see, between all the baddies and the twisting paths blocked by rock walls, exploring the forest navel takes either a lot of prep or a lot of bravery. But let's get on with specifics. Our first part to look at is the automatic gear. It's mandatory, but the description makes it sound like its only purpose is to make steering easier, so I'm not sure why. Your Pikmin have got to build and climb a stick in order to reach it. The place they land with the part is close to some shearwings, but it's a little surprising because in my experience, they always carry the part the other way so they don't run into them. Seems like a perfect opportunity for a nasty ambush if you ask me. Then there's the gravity jumper, which is required for boosting the dolphin up to light speed, so this mandatory part gets an okay from me. Getting the part, however, is a little awkward. You gotta build 2 bridges to reach it, and with the way they're placed, it looks like maybe you're supposed to wait until you can have blues go around the back. But you can just sort of chuck anybody up on the ledge, and it takes a little doing, but you can get the building in no time. It's just hard enough to do that I wonder if we're not supposed to, but easy enough that I wonder why the whole blues in the back thing is an option. It could just be that they wanted to give us options, I guess. Something about it just feels awkward. Next up, the number 1 Ionium jet is just sort of sitting there in a little pool. It's kind of disappointing, actually. There's this whole series of ledges and pools that don't really do much. Like the best they could manage was just putting a part in some bomb rocks here. Feels like it could have at least used a unique enemy or something. Like, why isn't the Gulix here? That would be perfect! Anyway, the number 1 Ionium jet is mandatory, I suppose for simple propulsion, which also checks out. Here's a fun one, though. There's a very unusual enemy in this area called a bread bug. And this is a really terrific example of the developers exploring enemy types beyond hostile ones that just want to eat you. I mean, you're making a game where you're on an alien planet, you've established that your little Pikmin are a prey species, so you design a bunch of big defeat baddies that think they're tasty. It's already interesting enough to acknowledge that there should also be some non-hostile creatures on this planet, but making a competitive species is taking it an extra step. Not only is the concept interesting, but they incorporated that concept into the process of beating it. The bread bug roams around the stage, which is actually very unusual behavior for an enemy in this game. It grabs any kind of spoils with a weight of 1 and hauls them back to its nest one at a time. Pikmin can still grab these objects, but if only one does, the bread bug will overpower it and it will perish in that nest. Put 2 Pikmin on the object, though, and they'll drag the bread bug all the way back to their onion. And when it hits the onion, it will take a substantial amount of damage. It's just such a fun idea. It's the kind that could have taken 1 or 2 sequels to arrive at, but the devs dreamed it up nice and early. And I think that says even more about their thought process and strong creative sense when designing the game. Of course, even with this weird thing, there's an alternative way to beat it. It's impervious to swarming, but land a shot right on its back and it'll roll over and take a tiny amount of damage. This takes much longer unless you're just cleaning up that one last little bit of health, and it is much trickier. But I love the option. I love how basically everything in the game can be dealt with in multiple ways. Like, it was a goal of the devs to make sure no enemy required only one strategy. It makes these creatures feel so organic. I mean, look at this thing, tromping around the place, ignoring everything and hunting down pellets to drag back to its nest. Talk about a creature with a ton of personality. Once you defeat the bread bug, out will pop the space float, which is not mandatory because it's only a float for space. Like if you go overboard and you need to float in space. I don't
that was weird.
Either. Maybe habitations have some sort of inherent biological space propulsion ability, and this, okay, no, there's no theory or Pikmin lore here. It's just a dumb gag. Hey, it's a good one though. Space float. I love it. Way out in the lake on the far side of the level, you will find the anti-dioxin filter. It's mandatory, though according to the description, it only filters the ship's exhaust, so I'm not exactly sure why. This is a part that you can forgive for just sort of sitting there, because you have to trek through about 1 million fiery blowhogs and wollywogs to safely get it back to the ship. It has a weight of 40 as well, so it's not like you can just casually pick it up. Worth noting, also in this lake is a bottle. There aren't a ton of very specific human remnants like this in the game, so each one stands out a good amount. Something about the placement of this bottle in the middle of the lake is very serene to me. Very deliberate. It doesn't do anything, it just sort of sits there and makes you go, oh yeah, this is like Earth or something, right? Weird. So you want to talk about enemies that will wreak havoc upon your party if you don't know what you're doing? Let me introduce you to a boss called the Beady Longlegs. This thing is messed up. You think shearwigs are bad for taking you off guard? This thing, you wander into its lair and bam! It just kind of stomps on you, doesn't it? And any Pikmin in its way are squashed dead. Then after that, it stomps around all over the place. And if you've got any Pikmin left, only your yellows are going to reach its vulnerable body easily. And you know what? It might be easy enough to avoid its feet if you can use its shadow to predict where they were
Only
going to
one
land.
level.
But
That's
the
pretty
light gear
useless.
comes in at an angle, so the shadows are completely unreliable. This is easily one of the most potentially disastrous enemies in the game. That's not what I love most about it, though. What I love most is that this thing is weird. It's creepy and oogly like the armored cannon people, but it's even bigger.
Oh, nice.
The spider would be like 1.5 feet tall if it were real. And it only has 4 legs, and it doesn't have any noticeable features beyond the body and the legs, so it's really alien and creepy. Even better, when its health gets low, it starts to smoke, and its skin starts to flake off. And when it dies, it dissolves into nothing. What even is this thing? It's so gross! Oh, I love it. Beating it will net you 1 guard satellite, which is mandatory even though it's just a security system, so it totally shouldn't be. And if you try to bring it back to your ship with your yellows, haha, you forgot about all the fire geysers in front of the boss arena! This game can be cruel. As with the Forest of Hope, the Navel has multiple interesting bosses.
Remember the glowing mushrooms you can see from the higher part of the map? They mark the layer of the pup stool. And you don't get any
Damn.
darker or weirder than this. It's a
Really, it's just
positively
one level.
eerie area, and the pup stool itself is super gross and creepy. It's this big blubbery mushroom thing that runs around on two legs because, of course, it sprays out this nasty spore stuff that turns your Pikmin into mushroom Pikmin, which makes them attack you. It's like that weird fungus that turns the ants into the zombies. It's yet another way the developers toyed with predator-prey relationships and explored the insect-like nature of the Pikmin. It's also just another incredibly fun and unique enemy idea, and it's a shame that the game doesn't use it more. Even later games at the time of this recording haven't given the thing a second shot. Beyond challenge mode, this is the one place in a whole trilogy of games that you'll find it. It's also disappointing how easy the pup stool is to beat once you figure out how to just knock it over and throw Pikmin on it once or twice, but I can still very much appreciate its core mechanic. When you beat the pup stool, you get the Omega Stabilizer, which is also a mandatory part, even though it sounds like it functions just like the shock absorber. It just makes the ship shake less, I guess. Okay. One great thing about this part is that, as with the Beady Longlegs, defeating this boss isn't the whole battle. Getting the part back to your ship is a whole ordeal of its own. In this case especially, it's easy to not even notice all the stuff you need to watch out
okay.
for. Drop
Back
down ledges to reach the mushroom area. But once your Pikmin start heading back, they'll walk through fire geysers, right past a Wollywog, and even over a Shearwig nest for good measure. The part is fairly heavy too. It's got a weight of 30 despite being really small. So even though the boss is easy once you figure it out, the whole operation takes some dedicated time and a big old chunk of Pikmin. As I've said plenty by now, I just love how everything works in tandem, and how multiple enemies and even the environment itself can sort of team up on you. This little section might